Hi. There's quite a few experiences that I can draw upon that have impacted my view on race. I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and we moved around quite a bit as a family. I've lived on just about every side of Chicago that there is, even quite a few of the suburbs as well. My family is originally from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and my mom, she grew up very poor, but she worked very hard to make sure that we had that my sister and I had things that she didn't have growing up. She went to medical school in Belgium, then moved to here in Chicago in the 80s, and had my sister and I. And she was the main person who taught us about a little bit of everything, really. But she really tried to teach us about society and race and colorism as well, and just trying to prepare us for some of the things that we might face, and how we might be treated differently because we were black or because we were dark or because we were women, and just trying to help us prepare for some of the things that we would have to deal with. And I didn't necessarily believe my mom when she first started trying to tell me about these things. It took me getting older and experiencing these things for myself for me to really understand what she was talking about. For example, I think the biggest experience I can think of is her trying to get us into schools. Now, Chicago is very segregated. It's a lot better today, but it has a long history of segregation. And my mother was very big on education, so she tried to get us into the very best of schools. Those schools typically were all white, and she tried to make sure we got into the best schools. So she made notice of our names as well when she was trying to get us into these schools. My sister's name was a little bit more racially ambiguous. My first name is Misha, and my middle name is Melissa. Misha it's actually a Russian name, but she thought it was too similar to a lot of black female names, so she didn't want to take any chances with that. So she decided to sign me up for school under my middle name, Melissa, and she thought that was a little bit more racially ambiguous. And that was the first time I realized there was, that race was such a factor, or how big of a factor it was. I think I noticed race earlier than that, but I didn't realize how much of an issue it was until then. It was confused me at the time, because I was like, Mom, they're going to notice I'm black when I walk in. It's not something that I can hide. But she was like, you know what, that's okay. If you're already in the school, at least you'll be able to have a chance to prove yourself. There are some places who won't give you a chance if they know that you're black beforehand, or they'll write you off, or won't give you opportunities, or they'll make things harder for you than they normally would have been if they know that you're black beforehand. So she just wanted to take those kind of precautions. As I got older, especially in high school, I started to go more by my first name, Misha, especially when I realized more of why she kind of did those things, and I understood why she had the motivation to do those things. But I was more comfortable in my skin, and proud to be black, and I didn't care if I had a black sounding name or if it was similar to a black sounding name. So I was a lot more comfortable in my own skin. Growing up, it was a little bit difficult at times, because there were some people who just would remind you that you're black. Even when I tried not to think about it, they would remind you that you were different, or tried to make you feel like you were other, or made you feel like you were different in some kind of way, or inferior in some kind of way, or not as good as in some kind of way. You'll hear comments like, "Oh, you sound so white," and that's supposed to be a great compliment. And or things like when my friends would go tanning, and they'd come back and they'd be like, "Oh, I got so dark, and it's so terrible. I'm so dark," and things like that. And I'm sitting there, way darker than they are. Like, well, what am I then? If that's terrible, what am I? So it was things that I didn't really know how to process as a child, or just watching TV and movies and not seeing a lot of people that look like you, or not seeing a lot of positive representations of black women. So there's things that I didn't really know how to process until I got much older. And it's not necessarily things that I talked about per se, or really delved into these kind of issues. I didn't really think about these things, and I thought it was interesting how much I thought about these things. So it was actually difficult for me to kind of try to think of specific examples, because I just realized how much I didn't really think about these kind of things. And I was glad that I was able to have the opportunity to kind of pinpoint these examples and see how they impacted me and impacted my life. And I realized that I didn't really say anything because it's painful to think about. You don't want to think about how your presence is a problem for some people. It's not like you said anything to them or did anything to them, but for some people, not a lot, but for some people, your presence is an issue, or you're not welcome in some certain circles. So it's just, it can be hard to deal with sometimes. And you try to talk to people about these things, at least initially, but it's like a lot of people just didn't understand what you were going through, just because they didn't have to go through those things themselves. And you try to talk to them, but people get so defensive when you talk about race or when you talk about racism. And it's not like you're, you know, and I know I've said to someone one time that I'm not trying to tell you that you lynched someone in your backyard. I'm just trying to tell you that you telling me that I'm a good one is racist. But people are very defensive when it comes to these kind of things, or they'll say things like, oh, you misunderstand, or that's not what I meant, or oh, I have a black friend, it's okay. And or you know, maybe like for situations I've been through, when I try to express, tell people what I've been through, they've tell me, oh, like, oh, maybe you should have been nicer, or maybe if you smiled more, they wouldn't have followed you, or kind of things like that. And it's like they clearly have no idea what they're talking about and haven't been through these kind of experiences, so that it was just easier just not to say anything. But I think these are important conversations for us to have. I think it's important for us to learn about our history and understand how we came to be like this, especially Chicago's history and how segregated it's been. I think Chicago has improved quite a bit from when I was younger, and I don't feel like I have to deal with a lot of things that I used to deal with. Maybe just because I'm better at dealing with people, or maybe I'm just better at avoiding people who make me feel like I'm different, or that I'm, you know, inferior in some kind of way. But I feel like these kind of conversations, even if they make people uncomfortable, are good for us to have, so we can get to a better place and, you know, improve even more as a society. I'm very proud to be from Chicago. I don't want to deter anyone from Chicago. Chicago is a great city. It has a lot of character, and I've traveled quite a bit, and there's still no city that I have found that is as great as Chicago. Of course, I'm a little biased being from here, but I think it's a great city to be from, but it just has a lot of work that it needs to do, and some issues that it needs to work out. And I think conversations like this are a great way to start to get to a better place.